take a moment to take a few deep breaths and acknowledge ourselves for getting here this morning. It's like when my yoga teacher says every time we go to class, she says, thank yourself for getting on the mat today. Thank yourself for being willing to wobble today, because in yoga it's the wobbling that helps us learn the balance. Let's take a deep breath and just give thanks that we did all that was needed and necessary to be here in this place at this time with this collective consciousness of healing and renewal, this collective consciousness of empathy and peace, this collective consciousness, this reservoir of hope and faith, the companions that we share the journey with, the companions that support one another and lift one another up and are there to hold witness, to bear witness to what we call the good times, the happy times, and also the sad times, the hard times. So give thanks for community and family and friends. Teachers and angels all, because we all teach one another. We all lift one another up. So as we continue to breathe gently and let ourselves feel the healing energy of this collective, I invite you to listen to a poem by the Persian teacher and poet and spiritual presence Hafiz. It's entitled, "We Have Not Come to Take Prisoners." We have not come to take prisoners, but to surrender ever more deeply to freedom and joy. We have not come into this exquisite world to hold ourselves hostage from love. Run, my dear, from anything that may not strengthen your precious budding wings. Run, my dear, from anyone likely to put a sharp knife into the sacred, tender vision of your beautiful heart. We have a special duty to befriend those aspects that stand outside of our house and shout to our reason, please, oh please, come out and play. For we have not come here to take prisoners or to confine our wondrous spirits, but to experience ever and ever more deeply our divine courage, our divine freedom, and our divine light. As we take another deep breath, I ask all of us to consider opening our hearts, opening our minds to courage and freedom and light. We have not come here to be imprisoned by our fears. We have not come here to be imprisoned by beliefs that keep us separate from one another. We have not come here to be imprisoned by unkindness and hatred. We have come here to express our brilliance and to ride the waves of freedom and courage and joy and light. So take a few moments of silence. I invite each one of us to open our hearts and our minds to the healing energy of this collective, this community. and to also hold in this collective healing all those that we are holding in prayer, all those we're holding in our hearts, all world events and difficult issues. We hold in the presence of this community's healing energy, energy of love and peace. Here, we let ourselves open to the healing energy for our bodies, our emotions, our minds, our hearts, our places of uncertainty. We open to the healing energy for all that we're holding in our hearts, individuals, groups, organizations, governments, world leaders, nations, people everywhere, our human family, all life on this planet. Healing, peace, strength, courage, joy, freedom, light. And all together we say, so it is. And so we let it be. Together, so it is, and so we let it be. Namaste. Well, look at there. I didn't see that on my PowerPoint. Somebody did that. You know where that was, Lesta? You know where that was taken? At your retirement party. Yay. So today we are talking about technology. There we go. Where are we? Okay. Today we're talking about the power of empathy. Hey, Joe. Been missing seeing you. And you know we got a new land. And this is Mr. Montgomery, who we bought the land from. Isn't that great? Be sure to see him after service. Okay, so Marshall Rosenberg, who wrote this wonderful book, Nonviolent Communication, he's been in the world a long time, teaching us how to speak and be with people so that we create a space of healing and understanding rather than a space of division and separation and fear. And he's gone into war-torn countries and sat with opposing groups around the peace table, hopefully the peace table, doing this work. So this isn't just some nice idea that we think, wouldn't it be nice in our relationships if we could have better communication, you know, with our partners, our friends, our children, our neighbors, our HOA. This is work that's been taken into Israel and Palestine and Afghanistan and Rwanda. This is big stuff. And so when we give ourselves over to this kind of work, we might think, well, this is just going to be a nice thing to create more harmony in my family. And that's powerful. And if that's all we ever see with this work, that's great. There's something bigger. There's something bigger. The way we speak to each other can change everything. The way we think of each other can change everything. So when we quote the scripture, as we often do around here, we can do all the things that Jesus, the Christ consciousness, did and greater. We think, well, isn't that lovely? Yeah. You know. And then we get out on the road and drive on the surface road in Surfside. And so I need flashcards. You can do all the things Jesus did and greater. So this is because the way I speak to someone might change the way they go home and speak to their beloveds. And the way they speak to their beloveds might change or heal a wound in the family. Do you see how that works? And a lot of us don't know the impact of our healing, and we'll never know. We won't know the impact of our healing presence. Sometimes we're given a glimpse, sometimes we're given a clue. Oh, I had an impact, my presence had an impact, their spirit through me had a healing impact there. But a lot of the time, we don't know. We won't know. So we trust that the way we are in the world, our presence, the way we are in the world has an impact for healing. We have to trust that. And you are your own best guide as to whether or not you need to fine-tune a little bit. I know when I need to fine-tune. Often. I know where my fine-tuning is. Do you know where yours is? Do you know where yours is? Do you know where you need some extra practice? So Marshall Rosenberg said, empathy is a respectful understanding of what others are experiencing. It doesn't mean I have to go into full-blown sympathy and take on all the sorrows and pain that you're feeling. What it does mean is that it invites me to empty my mind of what I think you should be doing, empty my mind of any advice I'm thinking about giving you, and simply be with you. Be the presence of seeing your divinity while you're struggling. And I hope you'll do the same thing with me. Empathy calls upon us to empty our mind and listen with our whole being. Isn't that great? So in this book, the subtitle is Nonviolent Communication. The subtitle is A Language of Life. It's not a language of punishment. You know, a lot of people see the Bible as language of punishment because there's a lot of stories in there about punishment. We want to have a language of life. That's why a lot of us, when we do read scriptures, we read it with another perspective, a perspective of how does the life and love get through these words rather than punishment and condemnation. There is a pastor who is interested in this church for his congregation, and it may work out. We'll see. Highest and best. We know it's going to unfold. He asked me what kind of congregation this is, what kind of community. I said, you know, we have former everything. And we have former Catholics. We have folks who go to early Mass at St. Michael's, and then they come here for 11 a.m. We have Buddhists and Baha'i. We have Quakers. We have former every flavor of Christianity that you can name. We are a multitude of diverse experience and histories and religious understanding and spiritual perspective, and we are sharing this idea called unity. What a radical idea. And I told him there are a few folks in this congregation who thought they would never step into a church again because of the wounding they experienced in their former churches. And he said, I know about that. I said, yes, I'm hopeful that anyone who takes this place on as a church will be a church that welcomes all and will be a place of healing rather than wounding. And that's what we want our presence to be about, and that's what empathy is about. Accepting and loving one another right where we are without doing further harm. Right? So, what allows, this is a question that Marshall Rosenberg asked when he set out many years ago doing this work. He said, what allows some people to stay connected to their compassionate nature under even the most trying circumstances? And in fact, most of us feel our empathy rising higher and higher when we see some world event or group event where our empathy is just so strong, and we want to send money, we want to go help, we want to go help the earthquake people, we want to go to the Philippines, right, and be a helping presence. We want to be a part of the healing solution. Empathy is something that we're wired with, And if we don't know what to do or if we're afraid, we will close down our empathy. I know this because I've done it. If I don't know what to do or I'm not sure about that group over there that's doing that thing, I will close down my empathy so I can remain separate and not feel my humanity towards them. We all have done it. I'm not going to be the only one that confesses doing that. Okay. So, empathic connection, an understanding of the heart in which we see the beauty and the divine energy alive in the other person. I might be doing something really wacky, but you're going to do me the kindness of seeing divinity in me no matter what. I'm paying many of you extra money to do that. Right. We see one another's divinity. It's what the word namaste means. I bow to the light in you. I bow to the divinity in you. The Christ in me sees the Christ in you. The love presence in me sees the love presence in you. That's what namaste means.
It doesn't have to be in words coming out of your mouth. All energy travels. From your mind, the words that you have in your mind, you can connect to the other person and give blessings and love regardless of the situation. That's their journey.
You are so right. Everybody say amen. Amen. Yeah, David Hiller has done that in his workshops many times with kinesiology. Remember, he'll test the words that we say have an impact on the other, but more importantly and very interesting is when the other person's just thinking a thought and it affects the energy of the second person. We are powerful beings. So, what is your point of transformation? We talked about this a few weeks ago. And if you've noticed, I'm a big believer in repetition. I learned as a teacher, tell them what you're going to say, then tell them, and then tell them what you said. So the point of transformation, we all have points of transformation. You can also call it a choice point. You can call it a point of awareness, a moment of awareness. That moment of awareness is a moment of transformation when we realize that we have to give something up in order to deepen into our empathy. What do you imagine we have to give up? An old belief? Judgment. Fear. Ego. We have to surrender. The old Bible language, we surrender to God. We surrender to the Christ consciousness or the higher mind. We surrender to the heart wisdom. We have to let go of something. We have to let go of being right, or we have to let go of thinking everybody else is wrong, that my misery is your fault. We have to let all of that go. We have to surrender that. We have to give something up in order to enter into empathy. And a lot of us won't do it, and we know when the choice point is, and we still won't do it. This is the way my family has always believed, and this is what I believe. When in a moment of surrender, there's a moment of transformation, we realize, my family believed that, my ancestors believed that, and my heart's telling me, do no further harm, do something that's going to create healing presence. And then we have to push against every old belief and every generational pattern to get through to the light. Y'all have had this experience. It's a moment of transformation. Marshall Rosenberg said this, people who seem like monsters are human beings whose language and behavior sometimes keep us from seeing their humanness. Oh, everybody take it. Oh. We may not use the word monster, but by golly, we'll use other words, won't we? I can't think of any recent examples. We will decide they're not good enough or worthy enough for my love, my acceptance, my healing blessing. No, they did that thing. They're kin to the one who did that thing. They're in that group who did that thing 5,000 years ago. We have to give up something to enter into empathy. We're reading Brene Brown's book in Wednesday book group called Braving the Wilderness. How many of you have been in the wilderness, literally, the desert or the mountains or the... Now, how many of you have been in the wilderness emotionally? That's really what we're talking about here. Desert is easy. Camping out in the desert is easy compared to the emotional wilderness, the spiritual wilderness. So she says, think of one moment of courage that did not require risk and vulnerability. You can't do it. If we're being called on to be courageous, we're going to have to take a risk or be vulnerable in some way. So to enter into empathy, it's a very courageous thing. It's a very brave thing. We have to take a risk and we have to be vulnerable. There's just no getting around it. But you see, we're brave people. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting in a unity church, I can tell you. So, no vulnerability, no courage. We have to show up and put ourselves out there. Now, here's when it really gets scary. When the tears fall and the hard story is shared, we have to show up and stay with the pain. To be a witness, to be a holy witness and a holy presence to someone else's pain, someone else's dilemmas, someone else's struggles. It gets hard sometimes because we start cycling into awareness of our own pain and our own struggle and our own heartbreaks and our own woundedness. And some of us, too, short-circuit it. We'll launch into the story about our woundedness. It's funny the way we do that. It takes extra presence to simply listen and be present with the beloved who's pouring out their heart to you. It's called empathy. We surrender our judgment. We surrender our ideas of right and wrong. We surrender our advice giving. How many of you had the experience of giving advice to somebody who really doesn't want it in that moment? So, to be the healing presence in the midst of someone else's pain, you don't have to have all the answers. You simply surrender to being the healing presence. And let's take a deep breath. The world is in a healing crisis right now. The world is in a healing crisis. What's the good news about a healing crisis? Healing is happening. What are we to do in the midst of healing crisis? In this moment, the suggestion is we surrender to being the healing presence. We don't have to figure out all the answers. Surrender to being a healing presence. It's one of the key points of nonviolent communication. Surrender to being a healing presence. And then watch the miracles flow. So, I want to introduce y'all to my beautiful mother. Her picture's up here on the altar. Her name, Lillian Carter Allen. Did you know anybody else named Lillian Carter? The president's mother. Lillian Carter, the president's mother, was a nurse at Warm Springs, Georgia, during the polio epidemic. And my uncle lived there at that hospital with polio, and Lillian Carter, his nurse, would write little postcards home to my grandmother. You know, how Dwight was doing, how he's progressing. He's swimming today with someone named Franklin Roosevelt. And she would always sign it, your friend, Lillian Carter. So my mother was named Lillian Carter. So this is her spirit birthday today, August 5th. I know exactly what I was doing in 2001 on this day. It's interesting how we have those milestone moments in our lives and we remember exactly. I remember every hour of this day in 2001. And I'd like to take a moment to tell you a story. Is that okay? My mother she had an eccentric kind of personality in many ways. At one point, our house was painted charcoal gray. She had a bright pink door, and she drove a pink Cadillac. We also had a pink kitchen that year, and she also had a pink bathing suit. And she was fun and wonderful. She also could be mean. And if she coupled her drinking with that pattern of meanness, then there could be hitting involved, and the hitting could be painful. So it was a mix. All of us have the mix, right? With our beloveds, we have the mix. At the same time, she could be good crazy and not so good crazy. She was working hard and giving us so much. And she gave us tap and ballet lessons, and she worked hard to give us piano lessons and Girl Scouts and all of that. And I wanted to be a dancer. I never got to be the professional dancer. But those dance lessons helped me not be afraid when I stand up in front of lots and lots of people. I didn't continue with my piano, although some of you know sometimes I sit down at this piano and I play the few songs that I know. I didn't continue with the piano, but because I took piano for a while, because I had that experience of being so scared during recitals, I'm able to stand up here and in front of a whole lot of people and not be afraid. So I thank my mother for that. I thank you for all the ways she could love me and my sisters. And I love her and bless her for all those wacky moments when she was in her scary place. You know what I'm talking about. Because empathy means we understand and we see more clearly the beloved. And I'm not even going to call it forgiveness. It's a place of love that goes beyond all human understanding. And I value that she served as my mother. So I want you to hear that part. So at one point, so I'm going to take a deep breath. This is not an easy story to share, but I know some of you have had this experience too. At one point, my mother was wearing Depends, and she hated that. Oh, Lord, she hated wearing Depends. And at one moment, she had an accident. And it was a pretty messy accident. If you've ever cared for people in their transitioning time or their times of sickness, you know it can get messy, right? At one point, my mother had an accident. We had a moment of looking into one another's eyes. And I looked into her eyes and I saw she was, in that moment, like a very little girl who'd just done something very wrong. And what preceded this was, in my growing up time, until I was about 14, I was a bedwetter. And that was so hard for me, and it was so hard for my mother. It was horrible. And they didn't know back then that that was a sign of a trauma. It's a sign of childhood trauma. Many children go through this. But back then they didn't know, the parents didn't know, to look deeper for some kind of trauma that needed to be uncovered. And years later it was. But in that, growing up, she even bought me rubber pants at one point, made me wear them. It was so humiliating. Have you ever had an experience where you just felt so much humiliation? I felt so much humiliation. And she even called me pea horse. See? It was an unkindness. And in that moment, when she looked up at me after her accident, neither one of us had to say anything. I looked into her eyes and she looked into my eyes, and I realized she knew in that moment the humiliation that I had felt. She knew in that moment her words had hurt me very much. And we were in such a moment of love together in that moment that I tell you, it transcended any hurt place in me and any hurt place in her life that had made her so angry and so hurtful sometimes. It only takes a moment. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, we shall all be changed. Now let's take a deep breath. That is true, genuine empathy when you can enter into a moment with the beloved, especially a beloved through whom, around whom you've experienced wounding. And in that moment, we were both changed. It was a gift of love and a gift of presence. And I give thanks to Holy Spirit, to the presence of the Christ consciousness, of all my circle, all my team of beloveds. And it was like the windows of heaven opened. All around body evacuation. All around this moment that could be messy and upsetting and frustrating and embarrassing, we experienced the kingdom of heaven. That's what a moment of empathy does. I could have done something different with that moment. And so could she. She could have done something different with that moment as well. But we entered into the place of love. And just like that scripture in Corinthians says, in a moment, in one little brief moment, we're changed. I understand empathy because of that moment. I understand her life journey and my life journey in that moment. It's all clear. That's what empathy does. Let's all take a deep breath. Whatever has hurt us, whatever humiliation, whatever unkindness, whatever anyone said or didn't say or did or didn't do, in those moments, healing is already present. And I don't care if it happened 50, 60 years ago, as mine did. It's still present with us until it's healed. It's still present with us until we surrender it to the healing energy of love. So let's all take a deep breath. Right now, this room is so full of healing presence. Our hearts opened, our faith strong, and our awareness that healing is available to us in every single moment. And thinking of our beloveds right now, those who are struggling, even those who are now in non-physical, and yet we still feel a connection of wounding with them. We take a deep breath and we allow the healing energies to touch that place of wounding, that event, that memory, that body memory. Peace, peace, peace. It goes beyond all human understanding. So we bless ourselves, we bless our beloveds, and we bless all the events in our lives that took us to a place of feeling less than. We surrender that, and we open to the more than enough place, the powerful, magnificent light of the world that we are. And we give thanks, and we say, so it is, and so we let it be. Please turn to someone and say, thank you so much for being the light of the world. Namaste.